So, I was witness to a ginormous mistake this week. And it got me thinking about like these really easy to make mistakes in the design process that have more to do with the kind of mechanics of how you work. They're not really about the design process so much as they're about the steps that need to be taken when things go to print or when you get content from people. So I thought I would share a couple of non-job threatening mistakes and like how those have changed how I work, and then talk about it's about Lieutenant. Okay, so the first one. So this one has pictures. So this was we designed some stuff for an exhibition called Ordinarily Here at the Wiseman Art Center, or Wiseman Art Museum, I should say. It was a group show, and we made this lovely poster that used one artist got the front, and then we found the spot for another artist on the back. When I was working on it, I needed to type up a caption back here, and for whatever reason, for reasons completely beyond me, I just typed in what I thought the dude's name was. So I typed in Mark Kalier. And I remember the exact moment that I did it because I thought, I'll fix that. I'll just double check it later just to make sure it's right. And so as you can see, this thing, which luckily I did not do that twice, went to print with the dude's photo credited to Mark Kalier, blah, blah, blah. Hopefully I didn't do that on more than one piece of art. Nope, I just did it once. So it goes to print. They print, I don't know how many they print, probably 4,000 or something, seems reasonable. And then the client gets back to me and says, hey, did you know there was a typo on the poster? And I said, like, no, I didn't know there was a typo on the poster because you proofed it a bunch of times. You signed off on it like 2 or 3 times. And he said, yeah, it says Mark Kalier on the back instead of Adam Kalier. Now, the reason, it's probably apparent why that's shitty, because never mind that it makes me look bad, because the client can look through the stuff they sent over and know that at no point did it say Mark Kalier. And that for whatever reason, I bothered to look at the file name of the image and get that correctly, but for some reason, I just typed this dude's name out and literally just thought like, that's like a white guy named Mark? Cool. And that's what I did. And I still don't understand how I got part of his name right and then screwed up the rest of it. So the client's not even the one who noticed it. Of course, Adam Kalier is the person who notices, like, oh, cool. Like, you open this big thing up, right? You're in this group show. That's like a meaningful event. You look at it and your name is spelled wrong. Like, think about what that means. Like, every time you show that to someone, you know, you're like proud of the fact that your stuff is one of the representative images, and then you have to either preemptively point out that the name is wrong, or the other person will be like, hey, how come it says Mark? Like, it's so shitty. So like, it makes everybody look at it. Like, the client looks terrible because they signed off on it multiple times. And then I look terrible because technically it's not my fault, because like, I didn't sign the proofs, they did. But it is my fault because I'm the jackass that just keyed in a name in the first place, which could seem not like a big deal at all, like, because you type stuff into InDesign all the time. At the same time that I was doing this, I was working on that typography book, and one of the unreasonable requests of the publisher was that I had to supply a Word document with every single proper noun, anything that could be considered unusual, like as a word, like maybe some sort of specific term to graphic design, and anything that was foreign in origin. So like if you're using like déjà vu, being an example of like, that's a French term, right? That had to be in there with the correct accents. I did that. I want to say, like, after this went to print, before it came back, I had done this other unbelievably annoying thing. And the reason that they did that was that a really kind of common thing, is probably what my client did, what I did, is you get a proof, and the way you proof it is you just read it. You don't compare it to anything else. So you're just sitting there and you're like, you read it and it's like, if I'd spelt Mark wrong, I bet they would have noticed. If it had been like M-R-A-K, it might have stood out and they would have been like, oh, weird, Mark. And then maybe it would have triggered a response, but I spelled it correctly. So if you're proofing it and you have no context whatsoever, there's not actually a mistake, right? There's just like yet another name and you assume that name is probably right. Why would it be wrong? So Princeton Architectural Press made me supply this list because what the copywriter, what the proofreader has to do is when they hit a proper noun, so they hit like Christy Stewart, they have to pull out this list and look for that name and compare the two. And that's how they make sure that like you don't do stuff like miscredit proper names or get.
That's like a terrible job.
Yeah, it doubly saves them because they have a list supplied by me. So if it's wrong, they get to throw me back under the bus. Like I don't get to throw them under the bus. And so like there were a couple things that I learned specifically from this. So one of them, and it's like something I do at work kind of religiously, is never type. Like do everything in your power not to type in an InDesign file. That if you're manipulating content that comes from other people, make sure they give you content they can get from Word or from email or from a PDF in as direct a fashion as possible. If they're writing it by hand, a typo might not show up, might not be as noticeable. Because the other thing is, people write things by hand, you will notice they start abbreviating immediately because it is annoying to write by hand. So like words start getting shorter, and then you think like, oh, am I supposed to use the abbreviation, or are they just doing that because it's a pain in the ass to write this long thing? So if you get content that you can actually copy and paste, you cut down, you don't totally eliminate, but you cut down a significant amount of risk. So one was like never type. The other one is like proof copy in its native environment. So like try to get things in Word documents, get them in emails, and give it your own proof before you even put it in the document so that you can try to like catch those things as early as possible. And then the other one is like, I've debated it, I've never done it, but definitely after this, I thought about like maybe anything like this needs to have a style sheet. Like if we're doing a museum announcement, just like really quickly, copy all the artist names into a document and make sure that before we send it to the client, we've proofed it against that. So that's mistake shitty story number one. When I worked at Intermediate Arts, we did like a big folded calendar. And our printer calls and he goes, hey, I need to talk to you about the calendar. Like, okay, cool. He's like, on the cover, it says a celebration of women in hop hop. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like rifling through proofs. Like first I find their proofs from them and like, sure enough. And then I pull up a black and white proof of ours and sure enough, that's what it says. And he's like, yeah, it's already been printed. It's one of the folders who noticed this. This dude's folding 6,000 calendars and realized that this has happened. And it was like super embarrassing. And then we had to sit there and figure out like a solution for this. Like, do we take a massive like hit and print a new 6,000 papers? What we ended up having to do was print a sticker, and then we had to spend 2 days stickering them. That same issue also had, it was like a set of workshops, and there was like a certain formatting. The workshop series should have had a title, and then there were 3 workshops under it. There was the title of that workshop was, "This Needs a Title for the Series." Yeah, guess who typed that in? Yeah. And again, so many people proofed it. But I used to pass notes through proofs all the time, which like now it mortifies me, no duh. Because like I had this stupid thing go to print that said it needed a workshop, a title or whatever, that no one really commented on because by that point we'd made a big enough mistake that what was one more funny mistake. There was nothing to compare it to, so you just had to hope that someone caught it. And the other thing, and this is one that I feel like I was guilty of up until maybe fairly recently, is people proofed things not in a realistic context. So like anyone who's worked in an office where you have to proof stuff, like what do people do? They like grab it, they're standing around, they're between meetings, and they kind of glance at it, and they're like, okay, looks good. But how do you actually interact with that thing? Like if it's remotely worth reading, you actually sit down and read it. And none of us did that. That was not how we dealt with stuff. We skimmed it to make sure it looked right. And as such, we constantly missed things. Now, like if I design a magazine at work, once I have a proof, like even just one of my own proofs, I get a cup of coffee and I sit on the couch and I pretend like this is a thing that I should be reading, and I actually read it. And it's like what I try to get other people to do if they're proofing my stuff. It's like, please don't just glance at it. Like, don't look at it. Actually sit and read it, because it could cost us a lot of money, or it could cost us a client, or any number of things if we screw it up. The other thing that I learned from that, I did learn some lessons from it. I kept typing in files. Oops. I did this at intermediate, and then I didn't do it until fairly recently again, was if I typed into a file, like I typed in, this needs a titler, can someone, like some kind of FPO copy, like let's say I put lorem ipsum in, the thing I do now is I make a spot color and highlight the whole thing. So a lot of times, if you see like an early draft of something I've worked on, it's got shit in it that's the wrong color, and people are always like, what's the deal with the weird color? Like, part of it is to have a spot color in there, and the spot color is usually titled FPO copy, like delete this. And if you go to delete that swatch and it tells you please replace it, then it means like that's wrong. The other thing is, like in a project like this, it was a one color newspaper. So if I sent this to the printer, somehow if this went through, they'd call up and be like, yeah, there's a spot color in your file. What do you want us to do with it? And then I'd have to be like, why is there a spot color? Like this piece of content didn't have a title. So like it's not in the right font. Everything about it was wrong on purpose, and it was pink with this spot color. This one wasn't formatted correctly. So I sent them a note. On page 7, you need a title for this article, and blah, blah, blah. You'll know what it is because it's going to be pink. I do it now like in regular projects. Like if there's a mistake, I want it to be so egregious that someone's going to be like, what's with the yellow box? One thing that we do at work is like if we don't have a photo, but we have to make something, we'll put the photo in and then put a giant yellow box over it with like a slight multiply that says FPO image in giant all caps letters, so that like if it went out the door, someone somewhere is going to be like, that doesn't look right, and hopefully get back to us. The other thing I started to learn from that was, if you don't have content and for whatever reason you cannot go and get it, just write it. This was like the Corcoran newspaper that we used to design. Early versions, I'd send them these notes, like, hey, I need a headline, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, I got tired of waiting for that kind of stuff, and I would, still in pink, write a headline. So I'd write a headline, I'd reformat something, I would do whatever it was, and then I'd leave it in pink and be like, everything in pink is stuff I've rewritten. Like, let me know if it's approved, and then it changes to black. It gives you some way of like really visually tracking it. Because again, like it would be very easy to get yourself fired. But otherwise, like I don't remember if it came up in this class at all, but I'm 100% against lorem ipsum. I would rather have garbage copy written at like a first grade level than send something through with lorem ipsum. And actually, that's one of my other notes here, which is that proofs should be perfect. So I used to send shit through when it was like good enough, and I'd be like, oh, we can fix that afterwards. And my new method tends to be, you send it through when you're convinced it's done, and then other people see it and they find things about it that aren't done, and then they fix it, or they like point out typos or whatever. So to me, like sending something through with lorem ipsum, well, it's obviously not done. So it's either harass the person for the copy or say screw it and write the copy. Those of you that work in like nonprofit communications already know that most of the time, whatever you write is good enough. I learned that like at Knock, where when I, like at one point we had one copywriter, she was always worked to the bone, and you'd kick off a project and find out you couldn't get copy for 3 days. And I'd be like, well, I'll write the copy. And you just like write it, and like 9 times out of 10, if you write enough stuff, something in there is like good enough to share. And then it's like, oh, okay, cool. The Angry Bird sign has copy now. Yeah. So spot colors for FPO copy, and like anything you can do to protect yourself and have a giant like Because it's one thing to write it down and keep track of it, but it's another thing to have your file screaming at you, fix me. Much safer than trying to sneak notes in, thinking people are actually reading your stuff. The degree of like naivety I had to think that anyone ever read the proofs was like mind blowing.